Wyoming Territory, December 1883. The wind howled down from the north like it had a grudge, rattling the branches of the bare cottonwoods and sweeping sheets of snow across the open land. Travis Thorne reined in his bay, gelding at the edge of a narrow ravine, eyes narrowing as he spotted something that did not belong out here in the cold a shape, huddled and unmoving, barely visible through the blowing snow. He dismounted fast, boots crunching through the drift. As he got closer, he saw it was a woman, wrapped in a threadbare cloak, curled around two small children like a dying animal shielding its young. "Ma'am," he called, kneeling beside her. Her eyes opened, slow and wary. Her face was pale, lips cracked from the cold, but she still shifted to shield the kids. "We don't want trouble," she rasped. "I ain't trouble," Travis said quietly. "I've got fire and shelter up the ridge. You and the little ones won't last much longer out here." The older of the children stirred, a boy maybe 5 years old, his face flushed with cold. The baby, wrapped in a wool blanket, didn't make a sound. Travis could feel the fear in the woman's bones as she looked up at him, but she didn't ask questions. She just nodded once. He moved fast, lifting the boy into his arms while the woman stood, unsteady but stubborn. She cradled the baby close and followed him up the ridge without a word. The cabin was small but solid, tucked between pine trees, with smoke curling from the chimney. Travis had built it himself 6 years ago, when he gave up drifting and bought this patch of land from a homesteader headed back east. He pushed the door open, stepped inside with the boy in his arms, and called over his shoulder, "Watch your step." Once inside, the warmth hit them like a wave. The woman dropped to her knees beside the fire, pulling the blanket tighter around the baby. Travis set the boy down on a bearskin rug near the hearth. "I'm Travis," he said, peeling off his gloves and setting a kettle on the stove. "You can warm up, rest. I've got food." She blinked up at him, still guarded. "Clara," she said at last. "Clara Jessup. That's my son, Warren, and this one." She looked down at the baby in her arms. "Her name's Willa." Warren looked up at his mother, then at Travis. "Mama, are we staying here?" Clara didn't answer. Her eyes were fixed on Travis like she was waiting for him to change his mind. "You are now," Travis said. "No one sleeps in the cold on my land." He turned back to the stove, letting them thaw and settle. It took time. Willa started to stir, crying softly. Clara rocked her, her hands trembling, lips pressed to her daughter's forehead. Warren curled up near the fire, rubbing his feet. Travis ladled out some stew from the pot he had left simmering and handed it to Clara. "Eat first. We can talk after." She hesitated, but hunger won out. She took the bowl with a quiet "thank you," and Warren followed suit when Travis handed him a smaller portion. Willa calmed once she was fed, her cheeks slowly flushing pink again. It was not until later, when the kids were asleep in Travis's bed under thick quilts and Clara sat by the fire sipping tea, that he asked, "What happened?" Her voice was flat. "My husband died a year ago in Kansas. Fever took him. I worked where I could, washing, sewing, cleaning, but it wasn't enough. I heard about work out west, so I packed up the kids and took a freight wagon as far as Cheyenne. Then I walked." "You walked?" She nodded. "3 days ago, the last rancher turned us away. Said he couldn't feed his own, let alone strangers. We kept walking. I thought maybe someone would help." Travis stared into the fire. "They should have." She looked over at him, really looked this time. "Why did you?" He shrugged. "Because someone should." They sat in silence for a while, the fire crackling between them. The wind howled outside, but in here it was warm. "Safe. I can work," Clara said after a while. "I can clean, cook, patch clothes. I am not asking for charity." "I never thought you were," Travis said. "You can stay as long as you need, you and the children." She nodded slowly, but her eyes lingered on him. "Thank you." He gave a small nod back, then stood. "You take the bed tonight, I will sleep by the fire." She opened her mouth to protest, but he gave her a look that quieted it. She stood, walked to the bedroom, then paused in the doorway. "You saved us," she said softly. "I will not forget that." When she was gone, Travis sat back down near the fire, staring at the flames. He had lived alone for years, and he had liked it that way, quiet, simple. But now there were small breaths behind that door, a woman's voice in his cabin. And for the first time in a long while, the silence did not feel so heavy out in the cold. They had been strangers. But now, they were here, and something had shifted. The sun filtered through the frost-rimmed window panes, pale and sluggish in the early winter morning. Travis sat at the table sharpening his knife, slow and steady, the rasp of steel against stone the only sound in the room until Clara emerged from the bedroom. She moved carefully, as if unsure of her place, one hand resting lightly against the doorframe. Her hair was down, threaded with sleep, and she wore one of his flannel shirts over her dress. It hung loose on her, sleeves rolled twice at the wrist. "You've got coffee?" she asked, voice husky. He nodded toward the stove. "Pot's on the back, mugs are in the top cupboard." She poured herself a cup, then stood a moment, cradling it in both hands. "Warren's still sleeping," she said. "Willa too. I think they needed to feel safe before their bodies could rest." He didn't answer that. There wasn't much to say. He set the knife down and watched her drink. "What'll you do come spring?" he asked after a pause. Her eyes met his over the rim of the mug. "I don't know yet. I thought I had a plan when I left Kansas. But most of what I counted on turned out to be talk." "You got people back east?" "No. My folks passed when I was a girl. I married young. His people didn't want much to do with me after he died." She looked down into the cup. "I was a burden, plain and simple." "You're not a burden here." Clara looked up quickly, eyes searching his face. He didn't flinch under it. "There's enough room, enough food, and enough work if you want it." She took another drink, slower this time. "What kind of work?" "Barn roof needs fixing come thaw. Chicken coops near falling in. I've got a stretch of fencing that gave up last month. But more than that, I don't cook worth a damn. I keep clean enough, but not the way you'll want it with the children." "Sounds fair." He nodded once. "I didn't bring you here to save you, only to give you a place to stand." "I know." She pulled a chair back and sat across the table from him. Her hands rested on the wood, fingers pale against the grain. "Warren likes it here." He asked if the trees were magic. "They're old enough to be," Travis said. "Some of 'em have seen more than I have. You been here long, 6 years this winter." "Alone all that time." He didn't look away. "Figured it made things simpler." "And now," he paused, the whetstone still beneath his hand, "now it don't feel as simple." Something quiet passed between them before she stood, brushing hair back from her face. "I should see to the baby." Travis rose too. "I'll be out back." "Got a cow due to calve soon. Need to check the stall." She nodded and moved back toward the room, but stopped just before the door. "I'm not used to being seen, Mr. Thorne, not really. People look past a woman with 2 mouths to feed. I'm not most people." "You're not," she agreed, then disappeared inside. Outside, the wind had softened. Snow still lay thick on the ground, but the sky had cleared into that hard, brilliant blue that only came after a storm. Travis walked to the barn, boots crunching over the packed trail. The cow was standing, restless but strong. He spread fresh straw and checked the water trough, then leaned against the stall door for a moment and let the stillness settle in. He hadn't meant for any of this. He'd lived too long with silence as his only companion to imagine anything else. But now there were blankets drying by the hearth, tiny boots near the door, and a woman's voice in the kitchen. He didn't know what it would all become, but he knew this much: he wanted to find out. When he returned to the cabin, the air was laced with the smell of cooked apples and warm flour. Clara was at the stove, sleeves rolled up, cheeks flushed from the heat. "I found some dried apples in the crate," she said. "Hope you don't mind." "I don't." Warren sat at the table, hair sticking up in every direction, a wooden spoon in his hand. He looked up at Travis with a grin full of missing teeth. "Mama says we can stay a while." Travis gave a slow nod. "That's right." The boy's face lit up, and he went back to stirring as if the world had righted itself. Clara turned from the stove. "I'll make sure we earn it." "You already are." She didn't answer, but her eyes met his, steady and unreadable. Then she turned back to the pan, and the quiet filled in around them again, not empty like before, but full of something waiting to grow. By late January, the snow had crusted over, hard enough to walk on without sinking. The days stretched longer, the sun climbing a little higher each time it rose, though the wind still cut through wool like a blade. Travis kept to his chores while Clara settled into the rhythm of the place, not as a guest, but as someone who belonged. She stood at the table sewing buttons onto a winter shirt Warren had outgrown, adjusting the sleeves for him to wear through spring. Her fingers worked fast but careful, the way someone sews when they've done it more out of necessity than leisure. Travis watched her from the porch, wiping his hands on a rag after checking the trap line along the creek. "You ever think about raising chickens again?" she asked, not looking up. He stepped inside, closing the door behind him. "I did once. Lost the hens to a fox. Figured it was more trouble than it was worth. Might go better with someone keeping a closer eye." Travis hung his coat on the peg. "You saying I'm careless?" "I'm saying you've got more hands now than just yours." He folded the rag and tossed it in the basket. "That's so," she nodded, tying off her thread with a firm tug. "I'd like to stay, Travis, through the thaw, maybe longer." His boots slowed on the floorboards. "What about Kansas or Cheyenne?" "I've stopped looking behind me." She looked up, her eyes steady. "I'm trying to build forward." He didn't answer right away. He crossed to the stove, poured water into the basin, and washed the dirt from his hands. "You sure that's what you want?" "I've had enough of wandering." She set the shirt aside and came to stand beside him. "Warren's learning his letters again. He wakes up without shaking. That means more than any promise waiting in a town I don't know." Travis dried his hands and turned to face her. "I never meant for you to feel like you owed me something." "I don't," she said gently. "But I'd like to give something back anyway." He looked at her, then really looked. The hollows in her cheeks had filled in, but there was still a quietness in her expression that hadn't left since he'd found her in the snow. She hadn't shed it, only carried it differently now. "You mind company while I check the fence line?" he asked. She glanced toward the bedroom door. "Warren's napping. Willa's with him." He reached for his hat and held the door for her. Out in the field, the air was sharp but still. Snow crunched under their boots, and the fence post stood half-buried, worn from the weight of wind and time. Travis stopped where a section leaned outward, kicked at the base. The post rocked loose. "I can help dig it in come thaw," Clara said. "If you've got another post." "I do." Stack of cedar near the shed. They walked the line together, quiet between them, until they reached the slope where the land overlooked the valley. The sky stretched wide, pale blue above the white hills, and the river below ran slow but unfrozen, winding between cottonwoods like a deep thread pulled through cloth. Clara folded her arms and looked out. "I used to think about land like this, when I was a girl. Not in a proper way, just daydreaming while I did chores." "What kind of daydreams?" "Ones where I didn't have to leave, where nothing got taken, where the world stayed still long enough to feel safe." Travis glanced over. "You feel that now?" She turned to him, hair tugged loose in the wind. "I do, when I'm standing beside you." His hand found hers without thinking. Her fingers were cold, but they wrapped around his like they'd been waiting to. He didn't speak. He only kept hold of her hand, and they stood like that with the wind moving around them, the land stretched out below, and the sound of water running slow between the trees. When they walked back, she didn't let go. Not once. By the first week of February, the creek thawed enough for the sound of water to return soft and steady through the trees, like a voice never meant to carry far. Clara stood at the edge of it, her skirts tucked high above her boots, a basket looped over one arm. She bent to dip a cloth in the cold current, wringing it out before folding it into the basket with the rest of the wash. Behind her, Travis knelt beside a sapling pine that had bent too far under the weight of snow. He braced the trunk and anchored it upright with a length of twine tied to a nearby post. "You always fix trees that lean," Clara called over her shoulder. "Only the ones worth saving," he said. Her laugh came light, the first time he'd heard it not pulled from her by the children or worn down by exhaustion. She straightened and turned toward him, brushing a wet strand of hair from her temple. "I used to sew names into my husband's shirts," she said. "Not for sentiment. Just so no one take them at the wash house. I caught myself reaching for thread this morning and there was no need. No one else's shirts here." Travis stood, dusting snow from his knees. "You miss stitching names." "No, I miss the knowing that something was his, and that meant it was mine too." He didn't answer right away. The wind moved through the pines above them, full of old sound. He walked to where she stood and took the basket from her arm without asking. "You don't have to carry it," she said. "I know." She followed him up the slope, boots careful in the slush. Halfway to the cabin, she stopped and waited for him to turn. "There's something I've been meaning to ask." He paused. "Go on." "Did you ever have someone before? Someone who might come looking?" "No," he said. "I had a brother once. He went south chasing gold and never came back. Folks I rode with before I settled here weren't the kind to keep ties." She nodded slowly. "I only ask because I don't want to borrow peace that doesn't belong to me." "You're not borrowing anything." They kept walking. At the cabin, Willa was fussing in the cradle and Warren sat cross-legged on the floor, tracing letters into a slate. Clara crossed to the baby without hesitation, lifting her with the ease of habit. Travis set the basket near the hearth and crouched beside Warren. "What's that one?" he asked, tapping the boy's slate. "R," Warren said. "Like river and rabbit." Travis nodded. "You've got a steady hand." Clara glanced over her shoulder. "He's proud of it. Keeps asking when he'll be old enough to carve his own name into wood." "Soon enough," Travis said. Later that evening, after the children were tucked into quilts and the fire had burned down to a bed of steady coals, Clara took her mending into the corner where lamplight pooled. Travis sat at the table, shaping a length of birch with his knife, smoothing the handle of a small scoop. "I've been thinking about spring," she said without looking up. "I'd like to plant onions, maybe beans if the ground's kind." "I've got seed in the loft," he said. "Some barley too, never had much reason to plant it before." She leaned forward, running her thumb over her stitches. "I've never grown anything from scratch, not food anyway, just made do with what others already had." He set the half-carved scoop aside. "You'll have your own this time." She looked up, eyes catching his. "Will you?" He stood then, slow and sure, and crossed the room. She didn't move when he reached her. He crouched beside her chair, his hand resting on the armrest, close enough that she could feel the heat from it. "I've watched you carry more than one soul's worth of weight," he said. "And I've watched you set it down, bit by bit, without asking anyone to notice, but I've noticed." She closed the last stitch and laid the fabric in her lap. "You've never asked me for anything. I didn't think I had the right." "You do," she said. He reached for her hand then, not tentative, not unsure. She let him take it, her fingers lacing through his without hesitation. "I want to build this place with you," he said. "Not just fence and field, but the rest of it. The part that lives between quiet hours and morning light." She looked at their joined hands, then back up at him. "I've never been asked for that. You're being asked now." The firelight caught the edge of her smile, soft and certain. "Then yes." He stood, drawing her with him. No rush. No urgency. Just the stillness of two people who had already lived through all the parts that make a promise matter. Outside, the wind had quieted. The snow, untouched in the moonlight, glowed like a fresh beginning. Inside, they stood close, not speaking, not needing to, each knowing the shape of the other's silences and how to live within them. By early March, the snow gave way to wet ground and the scent of thawing pine. The clouds hung low most days, their bellies heavy with the last of winter's breath, but the land had begun to soften. In the yard behind the cabin, Clara knelt in the churned soil, sleeves rolled up to her elbows, nails dark with earth. A shallow trench stretched before her, lined with onion sets she pressed into the dirt one by one. Warren knelt beside her, his tongue between his teeth in concentration as he followed her lead. "Do they grow fast? They grow honest," Clara said. "Slow's more honest than fast." Travis stood not far, splitting kindling with a steady rhythm. He kept half an eye on them, the boy's boots sinking in mud, the way Clara wiped her brow with the back of her wrist without pausing her work. The sight of them there, bent over shared labor, made something settle deeper in him than it ever had. When the light began to fade, Clara stood and wiped her hands on her apron. "That's enough for today," she said to Warren. "We'll finish the rest when the ground holds drier." Travis stepped forward, offering a dipper of water he'd drawn from the barrel. Clara drank, then passed it to Warren, who drained it in 2 gulps. "You think the barley will take?" Clara asked. "I think anything will if it's planted right," Travis said. "You've got away with it. Not yet. But I'm learning." That evening, Clara stood over the stove with a skillet full of salt pork and turnips. Travis sat at the table, carving the last of the birch scoop for Willa's porridge. Warren leaned on his elbow, watching the blade work with open interest. "Can I try that someday?" he asked. Travis looked up. "When your hand's steady, you need to practice with soft wood first." "I'll do it careful," Warren said. "I swear." Clara turned from the stove. "There's time enough for all that. No need to rush a thing just because it's new." After supper, they sat close to the hearth. Willa slept cradled in Clara's arms, her breath even and warm against her mother's collarbone. Warren lay on his side with a quilt pulled to his chin, eyes fluttering shut mid-sentence as he tried to tell a story about a fox he swore he'd seen near the barn. Travis sat beside Clara, his shoulder brushing hers. She didn't shift away. She leaned into the warmth. "I've been thinking," she said, voice low, "about permanence." He looked at her, waiting. "I've spent so much time being moved along by other people's plans. My husband's, the townsfolk's. Even the weather had more say than I did. But I'd like to be still now. I'd like to make roots in one place. You already have." She turned her head, eyes searching his. "You sure you want that with me, with us?" "I've never been more certain of anything. You and the children, you're not wait. You're the shape of what I want my life to be." Her eyes softened and her hand found his, fingers linking without hesitation. "Then I'll stay," she said. "Not for now. For good." They sealed it not with a kiss, but with the quiet way their hands held fast in the lamplight while the children slept and the fire burned low. That was how their promises began, not as declarations, but as actions worn into the wood grain of daily life. In the weeks that followed, Clara and Travis built a life that fit them like a well-made coat. They added a pen for hens, cleared a patch near the creek for a summer garden, and repaired every leaning fence post between the barn and the ridge. They shared the work, the silence, the laughter that came easier now. Warren carved his first stick without drawing blood, and Willa took her first tottering step in the soft grass near the porch. One morning in late May, Travis came in from the barn with a bundle of wildflowers clutched in one calloused hand. Clara was by the stove, her apron dusted with flour. He stood silent until she turned, then held the flowers out, awkward and unceremonious. "For you," he said, "because it's spring. Because you're here." She took them, pressing her nose to the petals, then looked up at him with eyes full of quiet joy. "I never had flowers just because. You do now." She set them in a jar on the table, and later that afternoon, when the children napped and the chores were done, they stood beneath the cottonwoods, hand in hand, and spoke vows in voices only the trees could hear. No preacher, no audience. Just two people who had already lived their promises long enough to know they were true. They kissed then, soft, steady, and certain. That night, the cabin held no edges. Willa's soft breaths filled one room, Warren's dreams stirred in the next. Travis and Clara lay in each other's arms, the cotton sheets cool against their skin, the window open to the scent of pine and earth, and the long, deep stillness that only comes when everything has finally, truly settled into place. Years passed. The barley grew tall and golden. The hens laid true. Warren carved his name into the beam above the barn door with a hand steady as stone. Willa learned to bake bread with her mother's sure hands and ride a pony her father had raised from birth. And always, there was the love between Clara and Travis, a love not loud or hurried, but lived, carved into every beam of the house they kept together, soft as dawnlight and strong as the land beneath their feet. They never spoke much of the winter that brought them together. It became a kind of quiet story between them, told only through the way they held each other when the wind howled again, or how Travis would leave a lamp lit when Clara walked out to the barn at dusk. In a world that often turned hard and shifting, they'd found their stillness. And in each other, a home that held fast,